At this moment, you already have a really good knowledge about how to create a beautiful landing page for your users. Now it's time to enter a new chapter of this course where we're going to talk about API and database to do stuff like authenticate users and store data somewhere. And we're going to start first with databases. So what is a database and why do we need them anyway? A database, imagine this as like kind of like a Google Drive that is online that stores a bunch of data that you can access quickly, you can edit, you can delete them. We will need a database for many operations, for instance, to save users who sign up to our app and put them somewhere in the database where we store their name, their email, their passwords. You would need a database if you have, let's say, a social media where people can post stuff and save comments, replies. You would store all that inside of a database. Before we start writing any lines of code, let's understand the overall architecture of a database. How do we call a database? So your clients, a user, a visitor will always make requests to your web server. The web server right now is the little program running on your computer. Later, it will be running somewhere in the cloud so that anyone can access your app. At the moment, we don't do anything complicated. The web server is basically compiling your React components, creating an HTML page, and sending back to the client. But at some point, we want to do some more advanced operations, like the user maybe is asking for the dashboard page where they have access to some of their private information, which in this case, we have to access the database. The database is a place where it's another server, and it's a place where you only store data. You pretty much don't do anything else. It has an API key called a connection string that lets anyone with a key do anything on the database. So we never want to make a direct connection from the client to the database. We want to do that connection from our web server to the actual database. So for instance, if the user is asking for the dashboard page with his private information, our app will process this information, create all the React components with some empty data, and then it's going to ask the database, we need this information about that user, get those information, put that information in the HTML page and send it back to the client. This is pretty much how any database on the internet works. There are two types of databases, SQL for structured query language and NoSQL for non-structured query language. SQL databases are databases that are more, as the name suggests, structured, where it's a little bit like a spreadsheet where you have columns and headers where each data is labeled. So every user has a name, every user has an age and things like that. We're going to go with the NoSQL, where it's more flexible, where the data is stored as a little bit like JavaScript object. But the big difference is that we don't necessarily need to have a name, an age, and a hobby for each users. We can have a user with hobbies, we can have a users with no hobbies, and another value as a job, for instance. It's much more flexible. And for this lesson, we're going to choose MongoDB as our database, which is a NoSQL database. It's one of the most popular NoSQL database in the world, and you will see it's very simple. Now, just a little bit of wording with MongoDB. What we call a document is a little piece of data. For instance, when we save a user in our database, we could create a new document. It's written in JSON format that we've studied before. So you would have opening curly braces and closing curly braces. And then you would have a set of key value. The value can have different types. As we've studied before, you can have a string, you can have a number, you can have a Boolean, you can even have an array or an object. When we have multiple documents with similar values, it's called a collection. For instance, in our database, we'll have a collection of users. And you can create a collection for pretty much anything you want. You can create a collection for, let's say you have a marketplace with jobs available. You can create a collection for jobs. You have access to the Twitter database. There might be a collection for a list of tweets. It goes on and on. And then all the collections combined together form our database. Normally, for any business you create, you would have one database. If you create a new business, you would have a new database. And from time to time, if you want to test something on one of your apps, you can create two databases for one of your apps. So if you break the test database, the production database is still okay. It's time to create our first database.